when thunder rumbled in the middle of the ocean on a calm night. The 7 passengers on the ship shivered suddenly. This quiet and peaceful night had been engulfed by a terrible storm. All of a sudden, large waves began to rock the ship, and the wind sounded like screams. Raindrops were hitting the ship's windows like tiny wires. The captain, steering the helm, and one of the sailors said, "This storm came unexpectedly." This man, still holding onto his courage with his broad hat and sailor's jacket, was trying to calm the others. "I have a feeling that something is amiss." The other passengers on the ship also looked worried. First, a young woman named Mary spoke. Her red hair made her stand out even more. Her eyes seemed bigger than the fury of the storm. "What should we do? This storm could worsen any moment." Other passengers started to speak as well. Among them, an elderly scientist named Professor Alexander quietly shared his thoughts. His white hair and glasses gave him an air of wisdom and experience. "This storm reminds me of the stories of ships lost in these waters. Perhaps we've fallen into the clutches of the sea monsters told in legends." The atmosphere on the ship was getting increasingly tense, and the storm was intensifying. Everyone began to think about what they should do to stay safe. The sea was becoming wilder around the ship, and the storm had begun to invade it. The captain, holding the helm tightly, and another sailor said, "We might be drifting toward an island. We can only hope that there's a chance for us to survive on that island." The passengers realized that they were facing an unknown future. In the middle of the dark and menacing ocean, everyone on the ship began to anxiously await what their fate would be. The passengers on the ship grew more anxious. As the storm intensified, the wind tossed the ship around as if it were a mere toy. Enormous waves, covered in white foam at their peaks, rose like giant monsters. Mary clung to the ship's mast with trembling hands, her face drenched in the salty sea water and rain. She murmured, "How long will this storm last?" Professor Alexander sat quietly in his cabin, his books on the shelf tumbling to the floor as the ship shook. The sudden movement startled him, and he muttered to himself, "This storm seems to carry the wrath of nature." The captain struggled to keep the ship under control, but he felt powerless against the force of the wind and waves. His eyes flickered like someone chasing a treasure lost in the waves. "Everyone, be prepared," he shouted. "This storm could lead us to unknown places." The sailors did their best to ensure the ship's safety, but they felt helpless in the face of these wild forces of nature. The rain, the stinging drops whipped by the harsh wind, and the screams of the storm combined to create a nightmarish scene. After a while, the storm grew even fiercer and began to rock the ship. A scream echoed as the ship collided with a massive wave. Everyone fell to the floor, but the ship regained its balance. The hearts of the passengers were heavy, because they were in an unknown place and defenseless against the fury of nature. As the storm continued, the ship helplessly rocked amidst the waves. The passengers' faces displayed signs of worry and fear. While the sailors tried to secure the ship, its condition continued to deteriorate. Mary approached the captain with a worried look and asked, "Captain, what should we do? How will the ship withstand this storm?" The captain replied with a hopeless expression, "Unfortunately, there's very little we can do against this storm. Our only hope is to survive this tempest and reach a safe haven." Professor Alexander continued to examine his maps in his cabin. He thought, "I need to gather more information about the ship's location. Perhaps they were near an island, and their salvation might lie there." Suddenly, the ship was dragged into another enormous wave. This time, even more violent. The ship's boards creaked, the windows shattered, and water rapidly began to invade the ship. The alarm bell rang, and the sailors declared an emergency. Passengers and crew members were in a state of panic. A group of passengers tried to surface by wearing life jackets, but the waves quickly swept them away. Mary, Professor Alexander, and the captain decided to stay on the ship, desperately awaiting their rescue. The ship was taking on more water and sinking rapidly. Most of the passengers and crew had been lost at sea. Mary, Professor Alexander, and the captain clung to each other as they experienced the ship's final moments. As they began to vanish beneath the waves, they felt the wreckage of the ship being swallowed by the deep waters. This unknown and deadly storm had enveloped them along with their vessel. Mary, Professor Alexander, and the captain, who had been dragged into the depths of the sea, managed to survive. They clung to each other tightly before surfacing. With the diminished force of the sea, they found themselves on the shore of an island. White sands and palm trees gleamed before their eyes. They had no idea how large this island was, or how long they could hold on to hope for rescue. The captain, drawing from his maritime experience, had heard stories about such unknown islands from his previous voyages. Professor Alexander's cartography skills could help them explore this mysterious island. The professor began his task of making a map. Cleaning his glasses, they had only salvaged a few items from the ship. But starting with a voyage map and a compass, he began to sketch a rough representation of the island. Mary, carrying some food and water she had rescued from the ship, searched the coastline for a lifeboat. As they walked deeper into the interior of the island, they heard the sounds of wild animals. The path they followed was marked with the tracks of a predatory animal, and they proceeded cautiously. Every step was fraught with unknown dangers, and they were in a struggle for survival. The professor said, "We need to think about how we got here and how we can get rescued. Perhaps we can find communication devices, like a signaling device or a radio." The captain replied, "We should take whatever is in the wreckage for our rescue. Maybe we can find a signaling device or a radio. Also, we should bring the food and water supplies we rescued from the ship. We don't know how long we'll be on this island." Mary added, "Yes, we'll need to gather food and water as well. Furthermore, we should continue exploring the inner regions of this island. Who knows? We might find resources that can help us survive here." The trio ventured deeper into the heart of the island and began planning how they would cooperate to survive together. However, the island held secrets and dangers waiting for them. The struggle for survival seemed to be getting even more challenging, but they were determined to desperately seek a way to stay alive. As Mary, Professor Alexander, and the captain continued to explore the island, the mysteries of the enigmatic island began to unfold one by one. First, in the island's interior, they discovered magnificent and uninhabited forests. These forests were teeming with resources that could provide them with food and shelter. The captain, utilizing his hunting skills, examined the island's wildlife. As they roamed the island, they discovered some wild fruits and plant species, which helped meet their food needs. Professor Alexander studied the island's vegetation to gain more insights into its climate and geography. However, the island's secrets were not limited to its natural beauty. One day, while taking a walk along the coastline, Mary and Professor Alexander stumbled upon an old and abandoned structure. This structure bore traces of those who had lived here long ago. The ancient stone walls, collapsed ceilings, and old chairs were remnants of the former inhabitants' lives. The captain expressed his desire to investigate the origin of these structures and traces. "Perhaps people were stranded here before, and it seems like a tale of a journey," he said. Professor Alexander began examining his notes. "There must have been communities that lived on this island for a long time," he pondered. "These ancient remnants may tell the story of the island's history and past." During their research, the professor discovered that the island's natives had lived in caves in the island's interior and might provide more information about the island. Mary, Professor Alexander, and the captain set out for the caves to learn more about the island's history and secrets. However, when they reached the caves, they encountered an unexpected surprise, revealing just how dangerous the island's true secrets were. Mary, Professor Alexander, and the captain set out towards the caves to continue their exploration and learn more about the secrets of the island. When they reached the caves, they began to venture deeper inside. The caves were dark, and strange rustling sounds were often heard. Their flashlight beams illuminated the shapes within the cave. As they descended further, they began to see peculiar symbols and paintings on the cave walls. Professor Alexander noticed that these symbols were written in an ancient language, but they had to decipher it. Suddenly, a bone-chilling scream echoed from the depths of the cave. Everyone turned abruptly, and what they encountered stood before them. It was a terrifying creature that unveiled the true secret of the island. A shadow fixed its eyes on the lights and emitted a horrifying hiss. This was a creature carrying the curse of the island. It approached with deadly speed and attacked, while the captain, Mary, and Professor Alexander fought for their lives. The hiss and scream once again overtook the island's silence. Several days later, they were not found by other ships, and like the island's former inhabitants, they disappeared. The island continued to guard its own secrets and dangers.